Fort Records presents the Highbrow Players in my mythological narrative. This episode is entitled Odd Jobs. The Highbrow Players are Robert Crenshaw, Don Dixon, Marty Jones, Don Jones, Jill Bartlett, Steve Karras, Graham Mabey, Mitchell Crenshaw, Leah Crenshaw, Jamie Hoover, and Michael Datz. Some content may not be suitable for all ages. This is Jamie Hoover. We hope you enjoy the show.
Once I came back into town with my mom and took the train to the city, there was no way in hell I was going to go back to Detroit. As soon as we arrived, I started plotting ways to stay. The most obvious was to go see Herb Abramson and try to work at A1 Studios again. I made arrangements to meet with him and he said okay, that we'd work something out. I was excited. For a few minutes, it looked like it was going to be easy to resume my path to studio work. So, in August of 1979, I moved back to New York from Detroit, or more precisely, from Berkeley to Pelham, New York. Marshall was traveling in the cast of a Broadway musical, Beatlemania. He and his wife, Ione, had an apartment on Wolf's Lane in Pelham, about a block from the train station. They let me stay there on their couch for a while, mostly I guess because Marshall was gone a lot of the time traveling, doing the show out of town, and he didn't want Ione to be alone. Their apartment had been broken into and Ione had been carjacked by kids. She wasn't hurt, but I can only imagine that it scared the hell out of both of them. Actually, this time around at the studio, I cleaned up and set up sessions, but I also helped install a new air conditioning duct and did some general construction type of work. I didn't mind. Both of the guys I worked with before, Christopher Martinez and Mark Friedman, one of the 5 Mark Friedmans that I've known, were gone. As far as I could tell, I was the only one who was actually working there full time. Herb was bringing in various audio engineer types to do sessions, as needed. In 1979, from what I remember, most places in the city were busy enough to actually have employees, not just contractors. In retrospect, this should have given me a clue that things were not going very well for them. I had only worked there for a couple of weeks on this stint when his wife Barbara let me go. I figured they probably just couldn't afford to pay me, and perhaps I had only secretly been subbing for a general contractor they couldn't afford. I don't know. I was screwed, though I did have a couple of interesting jobs after that. One was working a scam selling magazines door to door with a group of others posing as students that I somehow got tricked into and felt like I had been kidnapped. I escaped after about a week and have mostly blocked that out. The other better one was working for an escape artist named Mario Manzini. I'm pretty sure there's a beautiful metaphor there. The day Barbara axed me, I was finishing out the day when the phone rang. Someone asked for Bob, and whoever answered the phone assumed I was Bob and paged me for the call.
Hi, Bob. This is Mario Manzini from Nightmare Productions. Remember a while back we talked about you working on my production staff? Meet me at Pier 59, Berth 5 on Saturday. I'll be easy to find. You can see the show and we'll talk.
I wrote down the pier and berth numbers and hoped the future would be more kind than the present. I had no idea who he was. I knew that I had never talked to him before, but I went to the pier as instructed. When I arrived at the rendezvous, there was a crowd, and there was a guy being handcuffed and shackled, put into a mailbag, and nailed into a coffin. I was dumbfounded. Once secured in the coffin, he was lowered into the Hudson River by a winch on the back of a tugboat. A master of ceremonies held a stopwatch and marked the minutes and seconds Mario had been underwater, trapped inside of the coffin. As they approached, then passed, the time allotted before Mario's imminent death. A few minutes later, the guy swam to the water's surface and the crowd went wild. A few minutes later, I was introduced to that guy, Mario Manzini. About 10 words into the conversation, he said,
I got a few gigs coming up and I need to put together a crew. How'd you like to be production assistant?
How'd you like to be a production assistant? I had no idea what that might entail, but I really didn't care. I desperately needed a job, and it seemed like honest pay for honest work. The next weekend, I took an early morning train from Pelham to an apartment on West 57th by 10th Avenue. I rang the door and they buzzed me in. I went up to a crowded apartment full of magic books and pictures of Harry Houdini and some of Mario's other heroes. I didn't really understand what I was seeing at the time, but there was a whole world of magic and magic tricks that I had never contemplated. I wasn't really even that interested in it so much. It was magic as far as I was concerned. It's funny the things you remember 30, 40 years after the fact, but Mario's arms were shaved. I didn't know, maybe his whole body was shaved, but I had never seen that before. Maybe it made it easier for him to slip out of a straitjacket without pulling the hair on his arms and back. I can only guess. I was then introduced to the crew, which consisted of another guy about my age, Mario's wife, an attractive woman who looked really great in a shiny costume, and some trunks of equipment. We then piled into a mid-70s Dodge van and headed toward the West Side Highway. I felt pretty safe. We worked weekends at county fairs in upstate New York. I think the first was up by Lake George. I mostly helped set up and tear down, but it was still great. I remember the first gig pretty vividly. We got to the venue, loaded in, and set up the equipment. It really reminded me of setting up for one-nighters with bands. I can't remember if we ever got to eat anything but carnival food, but eventually we got to the hurry up and wait stage as Mario waited for the first of the fall dusk to appear. He gave the other guy a nod and he and his wife ducked behind a makeshift curtain.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you the eighth wonder of the world, a modern Harry Houdini. Please give a warm welcome to Mario Mancini and his beautiful assistant, the lovely Miss Yvonne.
The show began just as the sun was going down. At the beginning of the show, Mario and his wife came out and told stories of their great feats performed all over the world, from Budapest to San Francisco. He then took a big swig of kerosene, pulled out a Zippo lighter, and spit out what must have been an awful tasting liquid that made a big bright blaze of fire. The crowd oohed and ahed. He then started pulling out knives and swords and did some sword swallowing with blades of various sizes. Geez, I didn't know how it was done. It was amazing. Then the big trick came. First, he pulled out a straitjacket and guaranteed the audience that this was a regulation straitjacket. He even said it came from Bellevue Hospital, which made me think of Jackie Gleason. His wife helped him into it and fastened all of the many belts on it, tightened the last one extra tight, and commented,
"Let's see you get out of this, tough guy."
His wife then pulled out some FBI thumb cuffs and secured them to his thumbs, and he joked,
It's a good thing we don't have any trust issues between us. We're rock solid, right, hon?
Just like the White Cliffs of Dover.
Then, some Siberian ankle shackles were taken out by the other assistant and handed to his wife, who applied them to his ankles and shot a menacing grin to the audience. Then, several pairs of what were described as NYC police handcuffs were put on his wrist, and he joked,
Honey, I gotta say, you do seem to be enjoying this a little too much. I didn't mean what I said about your sister. Should I be nervous?
Well, I do enjoy my work. And she does not sound like olive oil. Oh, Popeye.
Then, a regulation postal mail bag was taken out of the trunk by the assistant and handed to his wife. Mario hopped over so that his feet were standing in the middle of the bag. As his wife pulled the bag up, Mario crouched down and the bag was closed by inserting a metal rod through the grommets to the top of the bag. They each gave each other a loving glance, and he said,
I'll see you on the other side.
Then she got a serious look about her. As the bag was closed, the lights grew dim, and one small spotlight shone on the assistant with a stopwatch. He made some calculation about how much air would be in the space of a U.S. regulation postal bag, and the approximate time before Mario would have to be cut out of the bag. At that point, holy crap, I was given a razor-sharp Crocodile Dundee-sized knife to perform the task if required. As I mentioned, I didn't know how they did it. I had heard of people picking locks and hiding picks in obscure places, but I didn't know. I only knew that I wouldn't want to suffocate inside of a mailbag. As the minutes ticked by, the assistant with the stopwatch taunted the crowd with an ever-increasing possibility of a man dying for their entertainment right before their eyes. The foreboding time approached and passed, and I became nervous. I became a really nervous man with a very big knife. What should I do? I asked Mario's wife, should I cut the bag?
No, wait. Give him a few more minutes.
I looked at the other assistant with a stopwatch and I asked him, should I cut him out? With grim and dire certainty, he faced the crowd with a look that something had gone terribly wrong.
Ladies and gentlemen, if Mario is not out in 30 seconds, we are going to cut the bag.
At the very moment the clock passed 30 seconds, just as if it were planned, the bag began to rustle and roll. The crowd and I nervously wondered, are these the throes of death leaving his body, or is this a magical miracle? I guess it was the later. Within a minute, Mario was taking a bow to a much relieved cheering crowd. I was relieved too. I guess I should have assumed that it was shtick and that he was in no danger. After all, he was a pro. Unfortunately, the gigs with Mario didn't last very long. It was late summer, early fall, and the outdoor fair season was ending. As I did more shows, I learned a little bit more about what he did, but honestly, it was more fun not to know. I remember years later seeing Mario on a commercial doing a fire-breathing kerosene trick with a window company. I searched his name recently and he's still around, but now he's also an Elvis impersonator.
Thank you very much.
You gotta love show business. After Mario was done for the summer, I was dead in the water. I had been desperately applying for jobs at recording studios and finally took a job at a little factory called J.J. Conley Roller Grill in Pelham, New York, out of desperation. The J.J. Conley Roller Grill is a staple of New York fine dining, wherever fine grilled hot dogs were sold. I was from Detroit, so as far as I was concerned, New Yorkers knew squat about hot dogs next to our cherished Michigan Coney dog. The Conley Roller Grill has heating coils embedded in metal cylinders about 20 inches long. There are anywhere from 6 to 20 laid side by side, and a chain-driven mechanism so that the cylinders slowly turn so the hot dogs don't burn. I think I only worked there for about a month making these mechanical hot dog cooking miracles when Willie called me. He asked me if I was interested in working at a rehearsal studio in the same building he worked in. I got choked up. I was feeling pretty miserable. I was definitely interested and relieved. Later that week, I took the Stanford local from Pelham to Grand Central, then the subway down to Union Square. It was pretty much right around the corner from where I had gone to school. It felt familiar. It felt right. I went up to the 12th floor and met Willie up at RPM Recording Studios where he worked. The finishing touches were being put on the place, and it was beautiful. They had an MCI 428, later to be replaced by a Neve 8068, and a Studer A80 24-track machine. Beautifully crafted machines in the kind of place that I had dreamed of. He gave me the nickel tour, and then we took the elevator to the 6th floor where he introduced me to Joe Dick, one of the owners of Quack Productions. Joe Dick was an interesting guy in his early 30s when we first met. He owned a construction company, and I'm going to assume that he had been working in construction since he was a kid. He had lots of plumbing, electrical, and carpentry equipment, professional grade stuff, and he was a bright and knowledgeable guy. He had also had some trouble with the law. From what I could gather, Joe had completed his undergraduate studies and was in medical school when he and his buddies got the bright idea to make and sell some LSD. He got caught and apparently did not make such a good impression on the judge because he spent some time in jail. Joe had a brother named Bill. Bill was one of the owners of the legendary Lone Star Cafe right around the corner on 5th Avenue and 13th Street. Later on, that would make for some interesting times. At the moment, though, I was a 21-year-old kid from Detroit in desperate need of a job and some kind of a break. So far, my return to the Empire State had been pretty much of a bust. I would have been grateful to work for minimum wage at this point. Joe knew Willie from RPM, and Willie was pretty much telling Joe that he had to hire me. I think Joe kind of liked the narrative of me being from the Midwest. I didn't know it, but a lot of people in that circle were from the Midwest. In about 20 ways, this turned out to be a really good break for me. Joe told me that if I was willing to work a little construction sometimes, he could pay me a bit more than if I only worked at the rehearsal studio. That was the kind of sentence I was dying to hear. I knew shit about construction in some ways, but I had watched very closely as the house on Oakshire was built and actually memorized each step of the construction. Joe had built some recording studios, including RPM upstairs, and that was all I had really heard. I knew shit about running a rehearsal studio for that matter. Of course, I knew about all the gear and I could get it up running, but there was the interpersonal part of dealing with creative types in a service capacity that took me a minute to adjust to. I had a fair amount of experience being in bands at a certain level, but I had never ever met people in the actual record industry before. People in bands who were signed to major labels. There were, of course, lots of riff-raff and posers, but there were also lots of really talented, focused people as well. Perhaps it's because of the impermanent nature of the entertainment business, but musician types are often dream chasers. Those who have a really clear vision of what they want and work hard at it stand a chance. Musical directors and arrangers, really good supporting players, flexible, lucky people who have their shit together. I met more than a few of those. Quack Productions was in the under construction phase when I started there, but we were booking rehearsal time and chugging along. It was a buzz of activity. There were 2 rehearsal rooms. One was about 12 by 16, the other about 30 by 30. The smaller room was more like a rehearsal cell than a studio. Get 5 or 6 guys in there playing, and after a while, you could really smell the rock. Which begs the question, what does rock smell like? Well, the smell I associate with rock, in a confined space, is a mixture of Tolex plastic, what most amplifiers are covered in, curing from the heat of vacuum tubes, stale cigarettes and beer, sweat and sex, with just a hint of cheap perfume or cologne, and the faint finish of vomit, farts, and weed. It's a complex potpourri, an olfactory celebration. The large room was more upscale. The idea was to have a room in which bands could play on a stage and do showcases for prospective suitors. It had a pretty good PA and monitors, a nice grand piano, and some Fresnels and Lico lights up on a truss to create a presidium or fourth wall between the band and the audience. Early on, I worked there with a guy named Nick Beholchek.
Rock, roll, rock, roll. You take some music.
I must have worked some rehearsals that night, then stayed up all night working construction. The bigger of the 2 rooms had a 16-foot ceiling, and Nick and I were tasked with putting up insulation in the ceiling before the sheetrock went up. At some point, Joe came in and chopped out some lines of some cheap amphetamine for us, so we wouldn't get tired. Today, that sounds outrageous, but in 1979, on the fringes of the entertainment business, to someone young and dumb like myself, that was normal. He left us a small pile of the illegal substance on a piece of paper and a $1 bill. We would go up on the scaffolding, staple in a section of insulation, come down, move the scaffolding, smoke a cigarette, snort some speed, and the cycle would continue until the job was done. We were living the dream. It was a different kind of dream for sure, but we were fully immersed. I was actually on the books at Quack for a while. I even had health and dental insurance because I work construction. I think Nick was doing it for barter time for his band Our Mutt. His girlfriend, Loretta Jones, did some graphic arts promotional stuff there as well. A lot of people came and went in the beginning, and there was a camaraderie and feeling among people who rehearsed and worked there that this could turn into something cool. That was the kind of vibe for me at Quack anyway. With all of its problems, and there were plenty of them, Quack did give me a sense of purpose and exposure to a pretty good sample of New York bands and national acts at the time. All kinds of new and different and exciting things for a boy from Berkeley, for sure.
Hey, we got a new track for you now. The new Fonzie and the Happy Days featuring Graham Mabey, Jamie Hoover, and the great Tralfaz Nahaj. Dig it.
Now she's gone, it's true. I guess I always knew that she wanted more from me than I had to see. I knew what I was heading for. I got to be strong inside, 'cause it hurts my pride to know she's not mine anymore. Well, alright, okay, I tried to make her stay, but she wanted more from me than I had to
'cause it's over now. I know she's not mine anymore. I guess I'll be finding out how to do without the woman I was living for. I got to be strong inside, 'cause it hurts my pride to know she's not mine anymore. She wanted more from me than I had, you see. I gave until there was no more. I'm gonna be strong somehow, 'cause it's over now. I know she's not mine anymore.
If I had to work late and be there early the next morning, I had no problem crashing on a bunch of pillows in the party space that we had in the back. Joe and Richard, the two owners, both had offices and bedrooms there, and there was a shower and a kitchen. Besides, the trains leaving Grand Central to Pelham didn't run between 1:30 and 4:20 a.m. If I was going to miss that train, I kind of had to stay there. Actually, a couple of times I missed the train to Pelham by seconds. This was back when 42nd Street was 42nd Street, full of porn theaters, topless joints, and swing clubs. A couple of times, before I got the idea to crash at Quack, I ducked into a porn theater and watched porn movies for 3 hours before catching the first train back to Pelham. This was an era of big-budget porn, with plots and sets, kind of a crazy cinematic experiment as the sex industry tried to reinvent itself. This was not long after Deep Throat came out. Deep Throat cost about $50,000 to make and is reported to have generated hundreds of millions of dollars over its decades run. That's a hell of a lot of money for a porn movie to make. The adult film industry exploded, trying to find ways to keep that level of revenue pouring in. Porn movies were like 60, 90 minutes long. I remember one that had Andrea True in it. Andrea True was an adult film star, but she also made records as the Andrea True Connection. She sang a disco hit called More, 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 and several other disco hits as well. At the end of the cinematic classic I saw, the house they were in blew up, and everyone was supposed to be dead, I guess, that was inside, like some kind of a crazy snuff film. Anyway, killing time in a movie house seemed normal and reasonable given the circumstances. Different times for sure. Some of the more notables who rehearsed at Quack were Dr. John, Ricky Lee Jones, Rupert Holmes, the Brecker Brothers, Stiv Bators, Cameo, and the Roaches. Some really great players came up and down that elevator. Some of my favorites, though, were the bands who'd come in, get high, make screaming loud feedback with their guitars, and yell into the PA for a couple of hours. They were like anti-music bands. In retrospect, I guess we did a lot of babysitting. My all-time fave was a band called the Hittites. They could make the whole place smell like rock. One time, I went into the room because I heard very loud feedback, and I thought someone was messing with the PA. I opened up the door in the back of the room to see what was going on. One of those guys had his guitar plugged into a Marshall 50 watt, but it was just leaning up against the amp, feeding back. And the guy was sitting on one of the couches, contentedly listening to it. He must have been high on drugs. I just turned back around and shut the door. He seemed at peace with himself. Keith Avedon was one of the first customers I met at Quack. He had had polio when he was a kid, and he walked with a cane, but still had a kind of a Fabio look to him. He was an extremely good guy. He introduced me to Chris Donato as well. Keith was a singer-songwriter in his own right, but he was also a musical director for probably about a dozen different projects that passed through Quack. He used Chris for a lot of those sessions, and when Chris and I started playing together with Marshall, he pulled me in for a few projects. The two standouts were, number one, playing on a Calvin Klein jean commercial. It was one of the many that featured Brooke Shields on it. There's about 18 seconds of rock music playing in the background to a dancing Brooke. Then she says something like, "When I move, I really move. And I don't make a move without my Calvins." I can't find it on YouTube, not really sure why, but it was a thing. Number two, Chris Donato, Jimmy McAllister, and Keith and I went into a Midtown studio and recorded a faux Latin rock song called Mambo Life. The record was released on a 12-inch 45 under the band name The Ice Cream Gods. One of the fun things about the project was that we dressed up in togas with branches in our hair and did a pretty demanding photo shoot for the cover. I also overdubbed some timbales on the track. Keith was related to the photographer Richard Avedon, and we used one of Richard's assistants for the shoot. I didn't really know much about him at the time other than the iconic Nastasia Kinski photo with the snake, but years later I would go see a show called Avedon Fashion 1944 to 2000 at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and was absolutely blown away by his photographs. The one taken by the assistant was a black and white photo, and the photographer had some pretty specific ideas about its composition. So we had to hold somewhat uncomfortable positions repeatedly until he got the shot that he was looking for. In the end, the shot was funny and it was great. It came inside of the LP as an 8x10 glossy. I still have the LP, but unfortunately lost the photo. To promote the release, Keith made arrangements for us to do a show at the legendary Studio 54. Naturally, it was pretty silly. We pantomimed along with a record, as we did with a lot of TV shows back then. We set up on a kind of bridge runway that went over the dance floor. It was pretty uneventful. By then, all of the hipsters were gone, so it was mostly tourists and posers. A few people recognized me and Chris from the Marshall Crenshaw Band and were somewhat puzzled by Chris and I being there. I'm going to guess, though, that for Keith, it meant something. He was part of that scene back then when people lined up and were turned away at the door for not being interesting enough or rich enough. He was a charismatic fellow and a good self-promoter. The other thing about Keith was that he was the first guy, and really the only guy, that I was friends with to die of AIDS. I'm guessing that it was in the fall of '86 when Chris called me up and told me that Keith was in the hospital. He said he was in a ward filled with people who had pneumonia and that the hospital wasn't using the term AIDS ward or anything like that. I didn't understand, but apparently a lot of people died from pneumonia as a result of having AIDS. When we got to the hospital, he perked up to talk and seemed genuinely happy to see us. We talked about doing some stuff together and about Chris and my adventures on the road with Marshall. He had been in England working on a Chanel Obsession perfume commercial. This commercial may have been the first where he got to exercise his talents as an orchestral arranger. Really big budgets. He was excited about the work that he had done, but he also looked like a bag of bones, so thin and frail. Several times in my life, I've had conversations with people where we both knew that it would be the last time that we would see one another. It was like that. A couple of days later, I went back to Winooski, Vermont, where I was living, and really broke down and had a hard cry. He had a young son and a lovely wife. I didn't know the details of how he got the disease, but in Lower Manhattan, where I worked and spent a lot of time, there was a heavy fear and dread of what the AIDS epidemic was going to look like. I remember at one point talking with someone in my neighborhood when I lived in the East Village on Avenue B about AIDS being a bloodborne pathogen and wondering if it could spread by insect bites. We just didn't know, and not knowing can be pretty scary. After he died, his wife Elizabeth Cox Avedon released a journal entitled Thanksgiving she had written while going through the experience of Keith's death. I found articles and reviews about it in the LA Times, New York Times, and Chicago Tribune. It was early on in the epidemic, and she had enough media savvy and access not to let Keith's death be in vain. Searching through some articles, it looks like she went to great efforts to help raise awareness of and advocacy for the disease. Another thing of some note is Keith's wife was the niece of Archibald Cox. Cox was an American lawyer and law professor who served as U.S. Solicitor General under President John F. Kennedy and later was special prosecutor during the Watergate scandal. During his career, he was a pioneering expert on labor law and also an authority on constitutional law. The Journal of Legal Studies has identified Cox as one of the most cited legal scholars of the 20th century. One time, Deborah Guardian, my girlfriend at the time, and I were invited to a martini party at Elizabeth and Keith's apartment. I think it was Keith's birthday. Deborah had been taking piano lessons from Keith. For the party, there was an obligatory shiny metal cocktail shaker set up with some martini glasses, olives, pearl onions, lemons, limes, and other festive accoutrements set up around an altar of alcohol. I had never had a martini before. With all the hub and lore about martinis, I figured that they must be pretty special. James Bond drank them, for Christ's sake. Keith took the magic ingredients and poured them over an ice-filled shaker, shook it up enthusiastically, and poured it through a bar strainer. He then lanced a couple of olives and set them in the glass. Perfection. I'd like to say that I waited for the host to serve himself and we drank a toast, but that may be a stretch. What I do remember fairly clearly is putting the glass to my lips and drawing 2 or 3 ounces of the magic elixir in my mouth and stopping. Holy shit! It was gin! I was not expecting that. I thought martinis were made with vodka. Other than that, I'm sure that it was a lovely evening. I guess life is full of all kinds of surprises. Yuck! Quack had two other revenue streams besides a rehearsal space. It had a several thousand square foot space with large windows looking north upon Manhattan, a commercial grade kitchen, a split level lounge area. There were wrap parties for the completion of a couple of major films there, parties at the end of political campaigns, LP releases, and a couple of regular parties. I met Robert Duvall, a couple of Kennedys, David Lee Roth, and a host of other entertainment types in that space at various events. The second revenue stream, and probably the more lucrative, was Quack Construction. Joe Dick made friends with, and we did a fair amount of work for J. Preston Allen, Sidney Lumet, and Bert Harris. They had an office together on 56th Street, kind of behind Carnegie Hall, between 6th and 7th. I was working there doing construction stuff late at night when it was crunch time to get the stuff done. Deborah Guardian had worked for Lumet Allen Harris. I didn't know it at the time. Lumet Allen Harris, collectively, those people had made The Wiz, Network, Prince of the City, Serpico, Death Trap, Funny Lady, and a bunch of other really big movies. It was a cool company. One night, Marshall missed the train to Pelham, and the office phone kept ringing. Eventually, I answered it, and much to my surprise, it was Marshall. He hung out at Lumet Allen Harris' office, watching me punch holes in the walls and the ceilings, snaking BX cable through hard plaster walls, and laugh. It was nice to have someone to talk to. I'm going to assume that we spent the night making and visualizing our new lives in our new dream, one where we were making records and touring. From the very first time that he and I talked about having a band, there was never any doubt that things were going to work out. We'd have to wait for a while, but it never was if, it was always when. And until when happened, I didn't mind working construction. It was honest work for honest pay, and all part of the big adventure, I guess. Once I got established as a fixture at Quack, Marshall and I used to go there and play music in the big room during off hours. Richard Sarbin, one of the owners, later became Marshall's manager. Richard had a Revox reel-to-reel tape recorder, and the studio also had a kind of a high-end Nakamichi cassette deck. Most people would record their rehearsals, listen back, and discuss their greatness. We may have done that a bit, but we also recorded bass and drums, and Marshall would take the tape back to Pelham and transfer what we recorded onto a TAC 4-track tape recorder. Some of that stuff came out years later on Marshall's 9-volt years CD.
New from Bonco.
Jeez, my stomach is really blowing up.
You didn't eat another chinchilla, honey, did you? Did you? I mean, I'm trying to raise a coat.
No, I'll never do that again.
Maybe we should try the Bonco gastronomical fixture, the GastroFix.
Everybody knows that the most effective way to eat is when your mouth and plate are both square and perpendicular to one another, using the Earth's natural gravity to let the food fall down your digestive tract. Based on the highly held theories of 2nd century physician Galen of Pergamon, the Bonco gastronomical fixture consists of two components, the plate leveler and the head leveler, using the theory of concentric spheres with 3 LEDs to indicate alignment. The head leveler consists of an attractive static-free headband with not one, but 2 bubble levelers. If your head is tilted forward, it is indicated by. If it's tilted back, it is indicated by. Side to side.
It's so simple, and I feel great.
It makes a perfect holiday gift. At Bonco, we make stuff. Sometimes crazy stuff.
By the way, I don't understand the line "I'm trying to raise a coat," so I don't know if I said it right. Thank you.
obsessed with the very same girl. We all are in love with you. Now everyone's in love with you. Now I suppose.
By this time in his life, Marshall had spent enough time studying records and arranging music that he could make pretty good sounding recordings no matter what data format he used. He could always do the most with the least, I guess. I remember when we first started talking about having a band, he talked about having guitar, bass, drums, and 2 background vocalists. We also talked about having a lap slide guitar player, and I remember actually auditioning Kenny Aronson, and because he was the only one who showed up for the audition, and he was nice and everything, but it wasn't really that practical. It's funny, we had several conversations about what the band was going to look and sound like, and several times he talked about Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps being the ultimate cool-looking band. I recently watched a video of the 5-piece version of the band we had to support the Downtown LP, and maybe it wasn't as cool as the Blue Caps, but it kind of had that feel. I wonder if his blue cap image was a deciding factor in having that band.
Well, I heard John say, man, she's my gal. I heard another say, man, she's my pal. Well, John jumped up and screamed, she's my gal, man, and that I mean, well, who slapped John? Who slapped John? Who slapped John when the lights went low?
Finally, though, economics ruled the day, and he decided to go with a 3-piece format. He and I had played around, just the 2 of us, as he worked out the arrangements for the songs in his head. When we did finally get a 3rd guy, it seemed like Marshall had a real good grasp of the 3-piece arrangements he wanted for each song, so mostly he just told the guys what to sing and play. Before we got Chris Donato, we had another guy we played a gig with. His name was Scott Miner. The gig was at Irving Plaza, and I believe it was put together by Alan Betrock and Andy Schwartz at New York Rocker magazine. The lineup was Joe King Carrasco, the DBs, and us. It's a little foggy, but that's what I recall. And for some reason, I also have a memory of Andy Chernoff from The Dictators being there, but I think that he was just Marshall's friend. We played first, being the new kids, but people liked us and they were nice to us. The other bands were great. Joe King Carrasco was the headliner and he tore it up. We really took to the DBs, and I talked to Will Rigby that night. He was a really great guy. What I also remember, and the highlight of the night for me anyway, was a really pretty girl standing up in the front singing along with all of our songs, even Marshall's. And of course, for me anyway, the whole thing was thrilling, playing in New York and all, and such a great place like Irving Plaza. We played cover songs like Glad All Over by the Dave Clark 5, My Little Red Book by Love, Tonight by the MC5, and of course Marshall songs, which were all great. I later met the singing girl, and it turns out she was a friend of Alan Betrock's, so there was some explanation for her knowing the words to the songs. But for sure, it was the first time I had ever seen anyone singing along, and it was really just all too exciting.
So long, everybody.
Sometimes when I take stock of my life, I'm thankful for the interesting things that I've experienced and misfortunes that I have narrowly avoided. In 1980, President Carter had an approval rating of somewhere around 28%. The hostage crisis had been taking a terrible toll on the morale of the country, and when a rescue attempt failed on April 25th, Carter was in trouble. Gas prices were soaring, and it looked bad for the Democratic Party. Both Jerry Brown and Ted Kennedy decided that it was time to step up and run in a primary. In the end, Carter got 51% of the vote, Kennedy 38%, and Jerry Brown about 3%. In New York, there was a party held at Quack for the people who had worked on the Kennedy campaign. For me, one party was pretty much like the next. I would run the coat check on the front end, continuously clean during the event, and finish cleaning after the event. This time, though, there were special security considerations, and there was a security sweep before the guests arrived. The word was FBI guys swept the place. I guess if your name is Kennedy, there's always potential for bad things to happen. A couple of days before the event, I was asked to take a rolled-up piece of carpet to the basement of the Lone Star Cafe, which was about a block from Quack. Joe did a fair amount of work there from time to time, so I really didn't give it that much thought. Somebody joked that there were guns rolled up in it, and I thought they were kidding. When they asked me to take the carpet to the Lone Star Cafe, I figured that there were probably tools for a plumbing job in it or something. In retrospect, I got asked to do a lot of weird shit when I worked at Quack, and this was just another day at the office. It did feel weird, though, to carry a carpet down the street, and I did start to wonder what was rolled up in it. I did my best to be cool about it, but it's hard to look cool carrying an 8-foot-long piece of carpet down 12th Street. When I got to the Lone Star Cafe, I just walked in, told the person at the front door Joe had asked me to drop it off, and I kept walking to the basement. I knew most of the people who worked there at the time, and it seemed like they were expecting me. Joe said to put it behind the furnace, and that's what I did. The party was fun. The R&B band Room Full of Blues was an entertainment, and they were great. Ted wasn't there, but one of his sons was. It's kind of odd, but I was taken aback how beautiful his eyes were. As a rule, I'm not attracted to men, but he was striking and he was nice. Richard Sarbin got him to sign something for Quack to put in the lobby. I kind of got the feeling that Richard may have met him before or even kind of knew him. The Sarbin family were people of means. I spoke to Richard recently, and he told me that his mother was heavily involved in the labor movement, supporting migrant farmers in the food industry. Leaders in the movement had stayed at their house when he was a kid during the Delano grape strike. I'm sure that lots of New York Democrat power players were in attendance. At the end of the night, everybody got their coats, thanked us for our help, and they all lived happily ever after. A couple of months passed, and I never gave it a thought. One day, though, a man walked up to me and introduced himself as Detective So-and-so. He asked me how and why I happened to hide guns in the Lone Star Cafe. I was somewhat confused, but I told him I was asked by my employer, who was related to one of the owners of the club, to put the roll of carpet in the basement. And it was kind of weird. Here's what I later gathered was a deal. Joe had been convicted of a felony which made it illegal for him to own guns. Rolled up in the carpet was a shotgun, a pistol, and some ammunition. I had never seen guns at Quack. As far as I knew, Joe wasn't a gun guy, but there were some parties where things happened that had the potential to get out of control. He did call the Lone Star and have the bouncers come over one night when someone tried to have a cash bar at our space. We weren't licensed for that, and the people who put on the party were selling even though we told them not to. I think he wanted to have a lever in case things ever did get out of control. It's a big city. I bet a lot of businesses have guns. I'm just glad I wasn't asked to bring guns to Quack.
Special thanks to Jamie Sims for letting us use her beautiful, gentle woman of a dangerous kind music.
Original music by Robert Crenshaw, Jamie Hoover, Don Jones, John Crenshaw, Don Dixon, and Marty Jones. Sound design and final editing by John Crenshaw. This has been a Treefort Records production. Y'all come back now. Here.
Want to find out more about my mythological narrative? Are you a small business that wants to advertise on MMN? Do you have an idea for a new Bonko product? Want to subscribe and get access to episodes and bonus content? It's easy. Just go to www.mymythologicalnarrative.com and go to the contact section. We're looking forward to hearing from you.